Thank you, Tim. That's inspiring and a lot about transformation, a lot about growth. And unfortunately, a little bit behind time now, so we'll have Q&A for about 10-15 minutes now. We will have another round with Tim tomorrow, and of course, he will be around all the time anyway, and we will also have all the Q&As for all the segment presentations. So when you, in terms of the Q&A, you have a speaker in front of you. You need to press the button if I give you the turn, and then you have to press the button again after you finish. Now, given that we are a bit late, let's have one question each. So start with Polo.
Yeah, hi, it's Polo Tang from UBS. Just a question in terms of fibre. What feedback have you had from the German government in terms of your fibre rollout plans? And then connected to the fibre rollout, do you think that rolling out FTTH to 2 million homes after 2021, would you need to do something sooner if Vodafone is pushing with DOCSIS 3.1 on cable?
So the first thing is we have communicated that what we are doing. First, that we are doing super vectoring for the 80s and for the 95%. We have communicated that we are now accelerating the business parks, 3,000 business parks. We are in discussion with all, let's say, the communities talking about the subsidization of these the rural areas. And just yesterday, 80% of Bavaria is granted into our direction and beyond that one. So I think the situation on how we are building out the network is something which is recognized. They've not had any negative voice of saying this is not enough or whatever. Yet there's even no press on that one. I think the most important thing is what we see is the moment where you have a bandwidth beyond 50 megabit or 100, there is no complaint anymore. But there is a certain area, and Dirk will talk about that one, of areas which are not covered today at all or with very low connectivity. And this is the prime area of political anger. Because these people, they have a right of data access and they cannot use or participate in the digitization. Our plan was and is made under the assumption that we keep the market share which we have today. And that we are able to continue with the growth in our service revenues on the fixed line side. So this is, let's say, our assumption. So we have anticipated in which areas where we have to invest first, in which areas we have to build our infrastructure and where we had the losses. We have anyhow, and I haven't talked about that, done the cooperation model. Dirk will talk about that one in a minute. So I think the market reaction is something which was behind our strategic assessment, and you saw that in our in the 4 dimensions which I showed earlier. It's part of the story. We expect that we are not losing market share within this time frame.
And there's no news from Vodafone, by the way, because there's no step up in their plans or change in their plans relative to what they said in September under the latest deal announcement. So maybe next question from Andrew over there. Andrew, Goldman.
Thank you. It's Andrew from Goldman. I thought your slide on the balancing complexity kind of got to the nub of the issue and what investors are struggling with at the moment. There's a lot of complexity, and investors are really concerned that regulatory support for growth is going to be pulled, that political influence is going up. So you've balanced the complexity over the last 3 years. What gives you the confidence that you can balance the complexity over the next 3 years? And maybe to give a less broad question, what's your level of confidence in your ability to deliver growth and returns over the next 3 years compared to the level of confidence you had when you did this 3 years ago? Thank you.
Look, the first thing is you should ask the same question to Dirk later on because he's taking a major role in this environment. At the end of the day, I think always that not fake news are helping. It's always, tangible facts. You have to be predictable and reliable in what you're saying. I feel sorry that we weren't able to fulfill until 2018 the 95%. But it took us 1.5 years to get the regulatory approval for vectoring and super vectoring. Without this long approval phase, we would be in a totally other political situation. The government then could have said, we accomplished the 50 megabit per second. So this is something which I feel wherever we come, people know when we're saying we're investing, Deutsche Telekom is investing. It's not something messing around or looking around. And Dirk should talk about, let's say, some big RFQs which we recently won, which is quite encouraging. The second thing is that the government and the political leaders understand that they just cannot sit there and say, build fiber. We sometimes think we are biased in our assumptions, but these guys are very reasonable and they understand that. And even sometimes they question me, by the way, why are you building rural areas? Why are you not overbuilding cable? Now, for us, this is not only a political decision, it's mainly a commercial decision. Because in these areas, we have very high market shares, and we do not want to lose this market shares perspectively. So this is this argument about that one. And the third one is, I think we are, there is a reason that fiber hasn't been deployed in Germany so far, as it is done in other countries. And people understand that independent from the political speeches, there is a reality which they have to accept, and they have to change the setup for this environment. And look, I'm normally a pessimist, and my glass is normally half empty, because I think this is the better surviving strategy. But I can tell you, wherever I go, people have the good intention, to help, investors for fiber to get a better setup. It's a complex undertaking, as you know, from all the powers which are working there. But with a good, reasonable argumentation, with not, messing around, with political commitments, with being in a very intense dialogue, spending a lot of management time with leaders and convincing them, with experts who are, supporting this way going forward. I think there is in Germany always, a listening ear.
Good. And Mathieu, have your question, please.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, Mathieu Robillard from Barclays. I had a question about your CapEx guidance. Since you've given a very long-term guidance, one would expect that by 2021, you have started rolling out elements of a 5G network. I want to understand how much was embedded into that. And more conceptually, I was wondering if in Germany and maybe in other markets, you feel that some parts of the network need to be mutualized, or you think you have the scale and the will to do it on your own since you put so much focus on network as a differentiation. Thanks.
Do you want to say something?
No. It's just the mutualization is a French term, so I wasn't sure you're familiar with it.
No, it's good. No, but look, for us, network development is not something that we say, okay, now this box, then this box, and then this box. This is, everything is integrated in a kind of in a consistent plan. In most of the markets in Europe, US, and in Germany, we have a fiber backhaul network, which is a big enabler. If we deploy now the sites, we know that most of the sites, are something which we could enable. We have the biggest tower core, and we talk about that later on. And the tower core is 55,000 sites in Europe. This is part. The 5G plan and the rollout is included in the CapEx envelope which we have laid out. And maybe this is something Claudia should answer in detail later on about how much of, as we want to do this, is part of the antennas and the infrastructure which we deploy there.
And as for the mutualization, Dirk will talk about, later about how we, the variety of approaches we have. But of course, we are open for joint ventures. We have a joint venture with EWEtel. We are open to use infrastructure of other players where they have deployed it. It's all part of the finding the right solution. Germany is a very complex country. You'll have lots of answers for that. Let's have another.
I think our build-out plan, to be very clear, if we are now 20 years out of regulation and we have a market share of 40%, how can somebody expect that we are building now 100% of the infrastructure? Nobody can expect that. By the way, it was political will that we have now this market share, which we have. So if we now take the 95% or 80% of the vectoring plus the 2 million which we deploy, after 8 years, we will have fulfilled our 40% already. So we are, let's say, fulfilling. Now, in 2030, the entire country would be fiber to the home deployed if everybody would invest at the same magnitude as Deutsche Telekom. So therefore, I think what we are saying here is we take our duty, we take our role, and we manage our customer base, and we manage, let's say, our business case, which we are able to run here. Now, this is what we are doing. Now, we have to see what the others are doing around that. Mutualization, the partnerships, is an incremental part of what we want to do, because we will not be able to build a 100% network for Germany. So we need the partnerships. And the reason why we are saying we need open partnerships is that we are not, or nobody is forced to overbuild. Dirk will talk about that one, that we are willing to offer access to our infrastructure in exchange to the access to the other infrastructure. And that should be something which we deliberately negotiate with the partners. And that is a new concept, which we are now bringing to the regulator and to political authorities because of the EWE-TEL deal. But the EWE-TEL deal is just the beginning of an even bigger cooperation idea which we have for Germany.
Okay. Anyone with no question that doesn't relate to German fiber? Dhananjay.
Hi, good afternoon. It's Dhananjay with Bernstein. My question is related to the level of ambition that is embedded in your outlook. Effectively, the outlook is same if you go back to the capital markets day 3 years ago, although your investment envelope has grown and is likely to stay at elevated levels, specifically in Europe. It looks quite conservative or unambitious from the outside. What am I, or what are we missing here?
Look, I think I find it quite ambitious what we're doing here. If we come where we're coming from. You know, 5 years ago, this industry was entirely shrinking. Our business was shrinking, including the US. Now we are growing in all the business areas which we have, and giving the commitment for even the future, for all our business being in a growth momentum. I think this is a good. If you believe that we can do more, you know, we will do more. We will do everything, you know, to get more out of this organization than, or the maximum out of it, what is possible. But I think this is a very robust and realistic guidance. I'm very confident that we are, with the track record of the last years, that we're able to deliver on that one going forward. I see what the commitments of other telcos in Europe are these days. They're even less ambitious than what we are doing, without giving you names on that one. So I think this is a robust statement going forward for our European footprint. And if we can do more, we will do more.
Good. Guy?
Yeah, hi, it's Guy Petty from Macquarie. I promise not to ask about fibre. We've gone through the entire presentation, and I notice on your charts that BT hasn't been mentioned once, nor is it coloured in the UK. Should we read anything into that, or is it just a case of the fact that because that's a peripheral asset, perhaps?
Okay. I did mention a lot of things in my presentation. So BT is one example, which we have to do later on in Thorsten's deep dive. He will talk about BT and how we see the situation there and how we're moving on. Anyhow, don't want to talk too much about BT here publicly, because it's very difficult to be, you know, a major shareholder and a BT board member. So we leave it to Thorsten later on to talk about that.
Okay. And question from Jacob, and that's the last one for Tim. Sorry, but we make sure everybody will get plenty of opportunity.
Hi, Jacob Bluestone from Credit Suisse. I had a question on your new distribution policy. You sort of explained the dividend side of it in quite a bit of depth. Can you maybe just elaborate a little bit on your willingness to do share buybacks, which you mentioned in the release? What are the circumstances where you would think about doing buybacks? And is that something you would also consider doing in a deal scenario, where you highlighted that EPS and hence DPS could go down? Thank you.
Look, the first thing is, again, we are doing this shift from free cash flow to earnings per share for a purpose of greater consistency. There were a lot of debates with you guys talking about, okay, what is the percentage contribution of free cash flow coming from the US, coming from Greece and other countries? What is the proportionate free cash flow? And is the proportionate free cash flow reflected in the dividend payout ratios which you have laid out in the past? Secondly, in the US, the share buyback program has to be reflected in even, in our dividend policy, because, we cannot do a free cash flow, share buyback in the US and at the same time paying out the same dividend, because the free cash flow is, at least in its KPI, in the way how it's made transparent, not changing. Going forward, I think the earnings per share, and most of the companies are focusing on earnings per share and adjusted earnings per share, is reflecting the ownership of the assets which we have. And having 42% of a bigger US asset, I think that should be reflected even in the main KPI, which is addressing the payout. Now, that said, we have two scenarios. Scenario A, the US deal comes. Then we have said we have an earnings per share logic going forward in the way how we are letting you contribute on the shares. Second scenario, the deal doesn't come through, which we don't hope. And then we are clearly committed to the share buyback program. We have the 2-3-4 program, 2-3-4 billion for share buybacks in the US. And then this program stays intact. So then there will be share buyback considerations in the US. In Europe, if we talk about the free cash flow guidance which we are giving for that one, and with the earnings per share growth which we see, I think we would more focus on the dividend than on a share buyback program for Deutsche Telekom shares here. So this is, let's say, in a nutshell, what we have in mind. I think in both scenarios, shareholders have an advantage. They get the huge contribution from the US going forward, plus the synergies on the one side. And on the other side, we have a share buyback and the dividend earnings per share development on the UM side. But anyway, we will talk about that anyhow later on with Thomas. And we thought very intensively about on this guidance from the perspective of a shareholder.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you very much and enjoy the day.
Thanks, all. So in Germany,